This episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany is brought to you with support by New York State United Teachers, which represents more than 600,000 educators and school-related professionals in New York. Dispatches is also supported by the public affairs firm O'Donnell & Associates. For more information, check out o'donnellsolutions.com.
This episode is also brought to you by Citizens for Affordable Rates. New York's car insurance costs are nearly double the national average, and state lawmakers must take action to make driving more affordable. Learn more at citizensforaffordablerate.com.
I've also declared war on potholes, so here's the first shot across the bow.
Well, as you know, with Planet Albany, there's always something that makes the planet turn.
And it's this amazing view of D.C., and Eddie Vedder comes out. And he goes, "You have a cigarette?" And I've never smoked in my life, but if I had, I wish that was the moment.
And this strategy takes us from potholes to knotholes.
I would like to say it was a pleasure, Mr. Kim. But I'm on the road.
I'm David Lombardo, and this is Dispatches from Planet Albany, a podcast about power and politics in New York State government. And on this episode, we're speaking with Governor Kathy Hochul's Communications Director, Anthony Hogrebe, who joined the administration in the summer of 2023 following a tumultuous session for the governor, who saw her chief judge choice and housing pitch rejected by the legislature that year. And while I remember being skeptical of the new hire at the time and scoffed at the perception that he was overhauling the administration's public persona in a major way, nearly 3 years later, it is fair to argue that the messaging has gotten tighter and the administration has been more effective in selling its arguments to the public, as well as taking credit for big policy wins. Anthony joined us in the studio, and I got to know him and how he plans on selling the governor's climate agenda if, or more likely once, she secures her rollback of the CLCPA standards. And one programming note, parts of the audio file we recorded got fucked. That's a technical term. But my producer, Aoife Forbes, was able to salvage the parts that were unintelligible. The result is intelligible, but sometimes a little odd-sounding. I appreciate your understanding. So, Anthony, you are not a front-facing official, so I think most people don't know who you are or what you do, even the Dispatches crowd. So I thought it would make sense to have you talk about what an average week might look like for you, including who were you interacting with and where are you doing your work from?
Yeah, so I'm communications director to the governor, which basically means, I play a little bit more of a strategist role.
Sure.
So there are a lot of folks on my team who probably interact with you and other members of the LCA and other members of the press corps more day to day, in any given day when you're working for the governor of the state or, kind of any high-ranking elected official. There's 1,000 different things that come up, and it's easy to get kind of pulled into and bogged down in, the immediate issues of the day. And so what I try to do, and I think people in my position try to do, is stay a little bit further out of that and spend more of the time thinking about what are we doing next week? How are we going to get our priorities advanced in the budget, right? What's kind of the long-term strategy there? So I still talk to reporters. I still talk to members of the media.
When? What is the threshold? When is it like, all right, we got to bring Anthony off the bench. He's got to come in and either be the heavy or sell something. What does it take?
I mean, it depends on the issue.
Because you haven't called me, and I don't take it personally, but I think it has to do with our maybe microphone level that we have. We don't warrant the Anthony experience.
I think let's see how this goes. But we're friends now, so we can pick up the phone more often. But I think there are certain issues just by virtue of I'm, in certain conversations that I might have a little bit more expertise in, or I'm kind of closer to the ground on. And so sometimes I'll say, I can just sort of chat with that person and fill them in a little bit. But again, a lot of my time is spent meeting with the governor, meeting with other members of the senior leadership team. I have a large and really talented team that sort of spans press and media relations, but we also have kind of a strategic comms team. We've got the speech writing team. We've got an entire creative and digital team that produces the social content and videos and graphics and podium signs and all of those little things that kind of contribute to our overall efforts to reach New Yorkers where they are.
Sure.
So a lot of my time is also spent just kind of managing that apparatus.
Does that include government affairs? Because I have to imagine there's a lot of overlap between the two.
Yeah, that's not part of my team, but we work very closely with sort of the government affairs, intergov. I mean, one of the great things about working for the chamber, and I think that the the systems that Governor Hochul has put in place is it's a very collaborative environment. And, I'm meeting pretty much every day with, director of state operations, the secretary, the, budget director, our policy director, our heads of intergov, right? There's sort of constant communication happening because we have to be nimble and we have to respond to kind of what's happening in communities, and, the issues change kind of on on an ongoing basis. We try to take kind of an all of government approach.
Because you have that maybe 10,000 foot view to some degree, is that why you have a Twitter that is basically not active in like the past decade? You follow accounts, but you're not tweeting. So does that mean you're a lurker, or are you just not checking the account?
I lurk a little bit.
Yeah.
And and people, I would say one of the nice things about having a team is people surface things. So I don't necessarily have to spend as much time on social media to see what's popping that's relevant to us. If I'm honest, that is both a little bit of a strategic approach in terms of I think you can get kind of lost, on social media, particularly if you're spending a lot of your time crafting posts.
Or just retweeting things, fighting the last war, if you're some people in the Cuomo administration.
Well, you said that.
Yeah.
But in general, I think you can kind of over-index for, Twitter, I think most relevant to sort of what you and I do. Mm-hmm. But, just in general, wherever you're getting your information on social media. The other part, if I'm perfectly honest, is I'm kind of in like the elder millennial cohort that probably just missed the threshold for being a true social media native.
Okay.
So some of it I think is just it was never something that I used that much kind of in my personal life, and so.
Are you online in general though? Because you also have a LinkedIn page, which I don't want to. Scare anybody.
You're really out of me here.
You're not apparently employed by the Hochul administration based on the LinkedIn page.
Well, one thing that the governor should take from that is that I'm not actively seeking other employment, I guess, because I haven't updated my resume. Look, I spend a lot of my time consuming online information, but I could probably be a little bit better at updating my own assets, so to speak.
Well, sticking with that LinkedIn page, though, it does say you did a 6-month tour of duty in the Cuomo administration, which you kind of have to think about like dog years. Must be a much longer time to actually be in that. Did you take anything away from that experience that you brought to this current role, either for good or ill? Is there anything you're like, oh, I really want to do this, or I really don't want to do this?
I mean, look, I was there in a very different capacity at the time, but I would say I was overall, at least what I had line of sight into in that job. I was always very impressed at the focus of the Cuomo administration, among other things. I think he was someone who, whether you agreed with him or disagreed with him on any issue, was able to really drive and advance a conversation and kind of, focus the policy agenda on a handful of issues that I think, they felt were going to be most impactful and most resonant with people. Look, this governor has a different style than her predecessor in so many ways.
Yeah.
But I do think we've tried to retain that kind of focus, and I hope that people see that in some of the emphasis on affordability and reducing costs for people and public safety. I don't know if you've seen any of our.
It's a word, I guess.
She's she's fighting for your family. I don't know if you've heard her say that.
Well, we can do a whole episode about whether that's the best catchphrase ever. But
I would love your perspective. Yeah.
I don't think it's the best catchphrase ever. But there's definitely been a noticeable focus on hammering home an issue over and over again, which I think is obviously smart because not everyone is following every word breathlessly that the governor says the way the LCA does. And I noticed it in particular with the social media stuff, maybe a year and a half plus ago, or maybe even nearly 2 years ago at this point. So how do you go about laying down that groundwork so that you can begin to identify the problem? Now you've got the problem fixed, and now we're going to show everyone how great job we did with that. What goes into something like that, particularly on something like social media, for example, where you guys had the big win on the algorithm usage by minors?
I would say one of the challenges working for government in general, and certainly for someone who's as ambitious and omnipresent as Governor Hochul is you work on a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. And you can reach a point of saturation. And, we try to remember, my team, and I think all of us who kind of intersect with this, that, people are living in kind of an information saturated environment.
Sure.
And, particularly with President Trump back in the White House, there's so much news and so much chaos coming from Washington that every day you're kind of competing for attention with that.
And how do you compete with a dumpster fire?
Yeah, and that's on top of, whatever's coming from, people's local elected officials, who frequently are working on things that can feel a little bit closer to the ground and more immediate to people in any given, city or county or community. And so what we really try to do is we ask ourselves, who is going to be most interested in this particular policy or APCA and what. And there are some things that we believe are pretty resonant with, a very wide group of New Yorkers. And those are the things that I think more often than not, you'll see her focusing on repeatedly. Right now, that's things like childcare. That's things like lowering the cost of auto insurance. That's things like cutting red tape so that we can build housing and clean energy and, other critical projects more quickly. There are other things that we do that are, maybe for a little bit more of a targeted audience. Mm-hmm. So maybe it's a regional project. That's something where we might, just pitch that directly to media in that area. Or maybe we send an email blast and we just target people in certain zip codes and that we're not sort of bombarding and saturating everybody. But I think the larger question we're always sort of trying to answer is like, what is most front of mind for people today? Where are people feeling the pressure?
But I'm talking about when you set the agenda. I mean, how do you go about doing that? Because it's not just like one hit where you say, hey, social media is a real problem. We think that kids are being exposed to this. We got to do something about it. You guys were bang, 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 bang. Yeah, I mean, how do you go about, laying that groundwork? Because I imagine it's not just simply like a concert tour schedule. You're actually thinking about it, in a coordinated way, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, look, we always try to go for repetition, not to oversimplify it, but there is a little bit of an element of if something is working, keep doing it as long as it keeps working. Sure. And if it stops working, then try something different. And so I think of all the things that we worked on in the last year, one that probably got the most engagement was the cell phone free school.
Sure.
It's for a host of reasons, right? I mean, but some of it is just, I think it kind of captured the zeitgeist in a way that not all issues do. And I think it was a national issue. I think this governor led on that issue and people really responded to that. And I think if you're a parent, you saw the impact with your kids.
It's a tangible thing.
Exactly. If you're a young person, you're experiencing it yourself. I think even for people who don't have kids, who just know how distracting your own cell phone is, I think it just sort of resonated with a lot of people. And she went out, she did listening tours. Right. She was going to schools and talking to school communities and families and parents and students and teachers. And everywhere we went, we were getting a big response. And it was driving engagement on social media. You guys were covering it with some regularity. And so we kept doing it. It was able to break through a lot. And I think if it wasn't moving the needle with people, we might have shifted to something else. But I think some of it is honestly as simple as if you find something that's clicking with people, you keep talking about it. Now, that said, if you only talk about the topics that are, part of the zeitgeist, so to speak, you're sometimes leaving a lot of important work, on the table. And as I kind of noted, particularly in an environment where what's coming out of the White House drives the conversation so frequently, you can get into a bad habit of how do we just chase the latest news cycle. Mm-hmm. We try, and I hope we do a pretty good job of avoiding that too. And, we always try to filter it through the lens of how does this impact New Yorkers, right? And if you look at where she engages with federal issues with the Trump administration, we're usually not just jumping on every moral.
You don't swing at every catch.
We try to focus on things, funding for the Gateway Tunnel, funding for counterterror, Second Avenue subway, some of these major infrastructure projects, right? Offshore wind that's going to provide, critical clean energy. Those are things that are, again, they're coming out of the White House, but like they're going to impact people who live and work in the state of New York. Sure. And so we try to, focus a little bit more on those.
Some challenges need someone who simply won't quit. Modern advocacy brings tenacity, strategy, and unwavering follow-through to every client it serves. Learn more at modernadvocacyllc.com.
Excessive litigation raises costs, car insurance, rent, even groceries. Governor Hochul is reforming our liability laws to stop bad actors from gaming the system and put New Yorkers first. Learn more at keepnewyorkaffordable.org.
So if the smartphone in schools is an example of how you're able to sell a policy win, I want to talk about moving forward, how you're going to sell some of the likely policy wins you're going to get in this year's budget. And you can knock. I feel pretty confident. Car insurance, seeker, childcare, and climate goals. None of them, though, are necessarily tangible or as immediate as the smartphones, and particularly the last one, the CLCPA stuff. You've got a lot of stuff working against you. Republicans are not going to be happy with whatever you end up securing. They're going to say you don't go far enough. And then there's the fact that no one's energy bills are going to go down the next day, even though there's an expectation that they would like to see some change there. So how are you going to go about messaging any changes on CLCPA that you might get out of the budget, given all of those challenges and the fact that it's hard to even grasp that? I mean, most people are just going to think about it as Albany rules and regulations. They don't think about it as the historic 2019 Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think if you see the way the governor's talked about this, we do try to talk about it in more human terms. And I think you're right. Most, if you stopped 100 people on the street and said, what do you think about the CLCPA? 99 will probably say, what's the CLCPA?
Yeah. And then the other one's Marie French. Right, and she says, well, let me tell you.
That's right. How long do you have? But so I think what she's been trying to say is, we need to be moving towards, more clean energy, and we set ambitious goals for a reason. But we need to also balance that with a shifting underlying reality that would lead to, just untenable costs for New Yorkers. And I think when you break it down in terms of, well, why do you need to make these changes? Well, think about what's changed since 2019, right? You had a global pandemic that led to supply chain issues that have not really fully been resolved. After that, you had a new, Republican administration come in that is outright hostile to clean energy generation.
Just to pause you for a second, as an elevator pitch, though, you've lost me now
Fair
on this.
enough.
You've already gone over the 30 seconds. So, I mean, I think you're highlighting the challenge, though, in how you're going to sell any of this to people.
If you want the elevator pitch, I think the elevator pitch is we can find the right balance. Right?
Okay.
We can address sustainability and we can move quickly towards clean energy, but we can do it in a way that doesn't add thousands of dollars in costs to your average New York family's energy bill.
But then you also have the fact that, like we saw with criminal justice, the governor came out with changes to pretrial detention laws. She came out with changes on the discovery front a couple of years later. And Republicans, though, didn't say, well, I guess we lost this one. We'll take our ball and go home. She solved the problems. And though those issues then kind of remain in the public mindset as maybe unresolved. And maybe there still is some issue with those in the minds of the public. And I think you're going to have the same thing here, where they're going to say, didn't go far enough, we're not fracking, and we're not, drilling in the Saratoga Spa State Park for oil. So how do you handle all that? Maybe you can't.
Well, I mean, one thing you can't do is expect that you are going to, stop any and all bad faith arguments, right? There's always going to be some universe of people that fairly or unfairly are going to paint what you've done a certain way. I think what we try to do is, to the extent that we can, reach the broadest audience possible. In some cases, and again, this isn't always easier or popular messaging, but help people understand that we're really threading a needle here, and we're trying to strike a balance between two very, very important objectives. And when you do that, you may not hit either one of them 100%, right? To your point, if we opened up state park land for fracking, that would help the affordability side of the equation potentially. It certainly wouldn't do anything to help our climate goals, which we believe in, which we think are very, very important. And, we could dig in and say, doing what New York can as one state to mitigate carbon emissions, there's no price too high for New Yorkers to pay for that clean energy transition, and we're not there either. I think we don't think most New Yorkers are there. The governor's been talking about this for several years now, that the standards might be increasingly unrealistic given some of the kind of changes in the world, and we're using metrics that are out of step with a lot of other states. So it's not like she just started talking about this a few weeks ago. No. But the conversation's intensified in the last few weeks, and I do think you see the way most people are reacting to it. They say, yeah, we agree. We may not be expert enough to know what changes need to be made, but we need to do something. We can't see this kind of spike in cost in the next couple of years on top of what people are already dealing with.
Well, as you say, this wasn't necessarily like a heel turn overnight. There has been a conversation that the governor has tried to lay down. And I think, though, the real formal way of, I guess, jumping into the deep end of the pool came with the leaked NYSERDA memo. So I'm curious, how did you decide that was the way you wanted to make a splash the way you did in terms of, yep, we're pushing all our chips into the middle of the table? Because you can't back off at that point. Now you have to get something on the budget.
Well, I will say, and you may have, but certainly none of your colleagues I saw observe this. It wasn't really a leak. People asked for
no,
how
but you gave it to
bring in these numbers.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's look.
It didn't go out as a press release, though.
Sure. Well, it's complicated, right?
Okay.
And I think there are times when the best thing to do is to have kind of a full stand-up event and announce something, and there are other things that are in some ways more easily communicated just by sharing data and kind of letting you guys interpret it and get it out there a little bit. I think in that case, we reached a point where it was clear that given some of the court-imposed deadlines and milestones in the court decision that's sort of driving a lot of this, we needed to be able to have a more substantive conversation about what would actually happen if you were to implement policies that would put us on track with the law as written in 2019. Because otherwise you're sort of talking about it in abstractions. And I think it drove a little bit of a conversation, and look, they're real numbers and they're sobering numbers. And when we saw the numbers internally, I think we realized pretty quickly people need to see this. People need to, if we're going to have a conversation about this, both with the legislature and with the public, people need to know what this would actually mean.
And for the environmental community that's listening to this and like, why aren't you pushing back? That's a podcast for another guest. We can focus on messaging here. But
I would, before we move up that, what I would say to them is, I hope that they know that this governor is still very committed to advancing an ambitious clean energy agenda. I mean, she put $1 billion in capital funding in the budget last year to fast track a number of clean energy investments.
$1 billion over 5 years.
But still, it's it's a significant capital commitment.
I know, but now I feel like I have to make policy points because you've decided to open the policy door.
Fair enough. I just want to be clear. We're not
fracking in the state parks.
Exactly. We they may not be thrilled with every adjustment that we feel like we need to make, but we are not abandoning by any stretch the state's commitment to our climate goals.
Costs are up everywhere, and New Yorkers need relief. Thankfully, Governor Hochul is fighting back against lawsuit abuse that leaves New Yorkers with some of the highest car insurance costs in the nation. Florida did it, and most drivers are paying lower insurance prices, some up to 20%. Albany lawmakers should back these reforms. Visit keepnewyorkaffordable.org to learn how the governor's reforms will put money back in your pocket.
It almost feels like you're trying to run back the playbook that you used on congestion pricing, where we had an environmental goal. There was this recognition by the governor that it would be costly to implement, and then fast forward to a scenario where we found the solution that is both environmentally friendly and affordable. So does that mean like sometime in November, December, we'll get the new Cap and Invest that is more affordable and great for the environment?
I can't predict where we'll land coming out of the budget ultimately, but I do think
seems like you would be the person who'd be doing that strategy, though.
But I do think you raise a good point of comparison, because when the governor sort of came back and said, we've spent some more time with the data, and I believe that we can achieve our policy goals of congestion pricing, both in terms of traffic mitigation and reducing emissions, and we can do it at a $9 price point instead of a $15 initial price point. There were skeptics, and there were people that pushed back and said, no, it's got to be 15. If it's not 15, it's not going to work. And I think the last year of data has shown that it did work at $9. And so I think it's fair to hold that up and just say, sometimes there are ways to make adjustments based on economic realities without abandoning the core objectives and to still meet those objectives.
And I think because, too, at the end of the day, if you do ever get around to implementing a Cap and Invest program, environmentalists are going to have to acknowledge that New York has something that like no one else does, and it will still be a leader, even if it is probably slightly scaled back.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I think when you look at what New York has already done compared to most other states, we remain a significant leader in the space.
You mentioned the audience that you're looking for certain things, and we, as press observers, can tell when something is a New York Times leak or when something is given to a trade publication who might specialize in something. How do you go about figuring out, yep, this is something for the New York Times, or this is something where, there's an industry group that's really going to care about this, so that's why we're going to the Politico reporter with the expertise? I mean, how do you go about thinking about that?
I mean, it's more art than science.
Okay.
I would say we're always trying to maximize exposure as much as we can, but also recognizing that there are some things that require a little bit more space and time to dig into. Mm-hmm. There's a whole host of reasons to kind of give something to someone or more than one person as kind of an exclusive or quasi-exclusive. But one of the bigger ones is, I think, for folks that are just kind of turning dailies or, who may need to produce, 3 bylines in a day, there's only so much you can dig in. And sometimes if we make news by just kind of dropping a piece of paper widely, or the governor's going to do an event to announce something, that's kind of all folks have time for to really engage with. And, going back to one of your previous points, some of this stuff is really complicated. If I want people to understand what secret reform is,
good luck.
Right, but if you can get a
actually tune into the Capitol Press Room this week, where you'll hear Ruth Ann Wisnauskas talking about the secret reforms.
Stay tuned. Yes,
yeah,
the best in the biz.
Another thing that I think about comparing the Hochul administration to the Cuomo administration is how the Cuomo administration always had a body here in Albany working the refs, so to speak. And this is something you and I talked about in our first encounter 24 hours ago. And I must say that first encounter, though, definitely goes a long way now, though, in how I approached this interview. It's Anthony Hogrebe, the human being, and not the abstract philosophy that I could come and, really stick it to.
Yeah.
But you guys don't have that presence to the same degree, just checking on people, here's that touch and just to make a joke, to ask what you're working on. How come?
I will both take that note and maybe challenge it a little bit. I do want to defend, I think, not that I take that as an attack or a criticism, but I think, we've got a really strong Albany-based, Capitol-based team.
They're accessible, sure. Yeah, and they're obviously focusing on special issues, but they don't, live on this third floor. They don't have pay rent up here.
I hear that. I think one of the things that I've tried to prioritize since I came in is to I think kind of rebuild some of the talent that we have in Albany and at the Capitol. Mm-hmm. I'm here a pretty decent amount, but I'm based in New York City, and I think a number of our team, even before I got here, have been based in New York City, and we're conscientious of that. And I've had some people leave the Albany-based team kind of early in my tenure, and I think we've started rebuilding that layer. I think Kara, our press secretary here, is exceptional.
Kara, if you're listening, you do a great job.
Yes.
And thank you for being so responsive to me.
I get what you're saying too, and I would say our goal is to be accessible, to sort of have and manage those relationships. I think we take a slightly different approach to the prior administration, and even
just
other places
slightly.
I've worked in my career, to how we engage with the reporters that cover us. But I'm always open to finding ways to engage a little bit more. And if you're saying that you want somebody up here yelling at you guys more frequently, I can.
Well, it doesn't have to be yelling. It could also just be that personal touch, shooting the shit, so to speak.
Yeah, totally.
And then you're like, oh, I like so and so, or maybe I'll take them a little more seriously when they tell me my reporting is insane or I missed something.
Point well taken.
But I could be wrong. What do I know? Some speed questions for you.
Sure.
Do you have a favorite Mike in the legislative communications game? Because you might be aware, there's Mike Frazier, Mike Weiland, and Mike Murphy.
So I would say I certainly don't have a favorite. We love all the Mikes equally.
You want to say it's Katie Delgado?
Mike Murphy and I go back a ways, though.
Okay.
I will say we were both at the New York City Council together, going back, probably almost 20 years ago now.
Do you have any Murphy stories?
Not ones that are ready for prime time.
But I guess he gets to keep his job for another day.
There was an Irish pub in the East Village that I would say we
closed.
We closed it a few times in our, we were both in our 20s at that point, I think. So.
Well, looking up the ladder, then, what is something the governor does when speaking publicly that gives you the most agita?
That's a great question. I mean, I think she let me first say one of the
with the caveat that she is great and a wonderful public speaker, and I love her, and through all things are possible.
She's great. I think one of the things that that she's gotten better at, and I hope folks see this, and I always think that we continue to kind of even do more of this, is really tapping into both her personal experience and also the experience that she hears from New Yorkers out of the state. And I think she's out crisscrossing the state a lot.
Hearing from a lot of diner owners.
She goes to a lot of diners. She hears from them. They hear from her. But it can be hard sometimes to find ways to sort of work that in. And I think, as you raised earlier, a lot of what we work on is so complicated, you can sometimes get a little bit caught up in the stuff and things. And so one of the things that I think she continues to do more and more of, and hopefully people see it, is really help people understand how does this relate to a family that she's met, and how does this kind of connect back to her personal experience? Because I think what I've seen is the more people hear from her and the more they see her, the more they I think realize that her personal experience is very, very similar to I think in some ways the kind of common experience of a lot of people in the state.
Well, clearly a communications professional, because I asked you a question about what somebody does that annoys you, and you came back with, "Isn't she great?"
Was that the question?
Yeah. Well, lastly, maybe here's somebody you feel more comfortable talking about what they annoy you. Anything that the LCA does or has a tendency to do that makes you want to come up to the third floor and fight either us collectively or maybe individuals?
I mean, look, this may sound like a dodgy answer too, but
you don't have to be diplomatic about us.
No. I mean, look, I've seen, in the time that I've been doing this, I've seen a real hollowing out of newsrooms, and you see it here, and in my various go rounds at New York City Hall, you see it in Room 9. Publications that used to have 4 people, 4 desks in these rooms, some are down to 1, some are down to none, and that's a challenge that I think it's certainly a challenge for you guys. I think it's a little bit of a challenge for us too, and I would say, I set it up that way to say I don't really blame you guys for this, but I do think it's sometimes it's made it a little bit harder to get people to engage on anything that isn't like the dumpster fire of the day, to use your phrasing, or just I think we can get a little bit caught up in the kind of intrigue of Albany, and some of that, and to be clear, like some of that is fine, and look, some of you guys are contributing to local or regional outlets where you kind of want localized stories, and some of you are focused on primarily like the politics of the thing. Sure. And we totally get that, but I will say it's gotten for people who do what I do, I think it's gotten harder with every passing year to land certain kinds of stories, and I think there are entire issue areas that sometimes kind of get short shrift, right? Like crime, public safety, technology. Some of these things always kind of pop, but stories about education, stories about how we're helping small businesses. I think sometimes there are like areas where we're like, yeah, nobody's going to make space for that, and that's, again, that's not like your guys' fault, but it's, I think if there's anything that's sometimes a little frustrating, it's like, oh man, that's so good, that like really help people. Who can we get to cover this?
I've got 50 minutes to fill daily on the Capitol Press Room, so you can just give me a call and you send me a surrogate, and they'll get 15 minutes. That's not a problem.
We'll do it.
Well, Anthony, thank you so much for making the time. I look forward to future conversations.
We'd love it.
Deal.
All right. Thank you.
You've asked this question or some version of this question in this little 3 to 4 minute exchange, then I have been asked by any individual that I'm connecting with when I travel around the state.